report on the, so my board members are going to want it for my Lifehouse project. So,
Okay. Cool.
and I don't know if you know that that's my company.
Yeah, yeah. I researched a little bit. I looked up the website. Yeah.
We're revamping the website. I have a marketer on it right now, so it'll look better than what it does.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself. how'd you how'd you start the Lifehouse project? How'd you get into it? How'd you get involved with domestic violence, victim advocacy?
So I grew up in a domestic violent home. So I have all of my history has to do with domestic violence. And my mother actually didn't even make it out. She ended up ending her life back in 2013. She just never was able to escape from the abuser. So I have a history since being 3 years old of domestic violence. And then, of course, as I became an adult and trying to function in the adult world, I was still in um, the scene of, or I guess energy, if you will, of picking abusive men and being in a domestic violence situation again and again and again. Is just repeated behavior with no help. There just wasn't any help. And the first laws that recognized and made it illegal and criminalized domestic violence wasn't even put into place until 1991. So, and I was born in 1971. So, domestic violence wasn't even illegal. So, it was very prominent. People don't realize that 50%, at least 50% of children are abused in America, even today. Now, my children, because of my repeated patterns of picking abusive relationships, which is of course was based off of what I knew and what I grew up with, my children were also affected and abused. And it also affected their adult life. And as I am healing and as I was healing, my children began to heal. So I got at least two of my children now are really making strides into healing and leading a way better life. But they were certainly going down that same road as I was. And I got two children right now who are still not doing very well. So that's kind of what leads me into the Lifehouse Project because it is based on my life. It is my very essence. And this is about really bringing in the true awareness of what domestic violence does to a child, what does domestic violence do when they are an adult, why it's being repeated, but also a true holistic healing that our program does. So we're not just addressing maybe the shelter issue or addressing, we're going to put you into safety for only a month, or maybe we're just going to do counseling. Our program actually is a 4-pillar program, which brings you into the physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and education and career health, if you will. So, because you need to be financially independent, of course, in today's society. So that's kind of the Lifehouse Project is me. So everything that I do is something that I've experienced personally in my own life. It's my very essence.
Well, thank you very much, Samantha, for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that. It's definitely I can only imagine how tough it would be. I grew up with loving parents, and I'm grateful for that every day.
Yes.
But what I guess that leads me into the question: what can domestic violence do to children? How can it stunt their mental development and such?
Right. So when it starts in the womb, and there's been actually research and studies done that the mother's very mood that she's in, and especially if she's stressful or is stressed out in any way, affects how the brain develops and fires. So it actually starts in the womb. And so when people say, oh, it's hereditary, the depression is hereditary, or this mental illness is hereditary, what they're really saying is that the mother was going through trauma while carrying the baby in her womb, and therefore the baby's brain developed differently than it would be in a healthy environment. And as we're born into that very environment that's going to shape our world, really what it does is our brains are shaped to handle trauma, is shaped to react and respond to trauma on a regular basis. It becomes our very nature. Just like a Scorpio knows to sting, it's its very nature. This is what happens. This is how it shapes the brain. It really develops, and it has the brain actually firing away in a different paths, and it normalizes the trauma. So then, of course, the body then is always on high alert for danger, but it becomes normal to be in that high alert and know that there's danger just around the corner. And this, of course, develops into many different mental illnesses and even PTSD. But it also goes and it will manifest itself out into physical illnesses such as skin diseases, psoriasis, arthritis, cancers, heart attacks, because it makes your body produce this high amount of cortisol all the time, and it wears and tears down the body. So in a way, or not in a way, it's just it becomes your very nature, if you will. And so anything outside your very nature feels very uncomfortable. So we have repeated where women or victims will keep on going back with a either the same abuser or a different abuser, but it's going to be an abuser nonetheless, because that's what they know. That's what they're familiar with. Even though it's painful, even though it hurts, that's what they know. They don't know, they don't even realize or can comprehend that there's a different world, there's a different reality, because it's just not in their nature. So they need to be shown that there is a different reality. They need to know how to get there. They need a roadmap. And that roadmap has not been available. They need the support system. And as long as they're staying in the same support system that supported the abuse, i.e., their families, I had to come completely away from my family. My family lives clear across the United States from me. I'm not anywhere near my family, because that atmosphere and that environment would keep me in that cycle of abuse. And it wasn't until I was able to come completely away from that that I was able to experience and start developing a new life and a new cycle and make new habits for myself. And it's been very difficult because I've had to do most of this research on my own. I had to figure it out on my own because the programs are just not available, and not really available in a holistic way, or in a place, or not a place, but a length that it needs to be. It takes more than just a couple of months. And our program lasts for 3 years. For children, our program lasts until they're 25 years old. Okay, because that's how long it takes to create and a new nature, if you will, not just a habit, but a new nature, and be able to really provide that new roadmap for them. So yeah, it's based off of my own life. I know what I needed, and it wasn't there for me, and I want the Lifehouse Project to be what I needed going when I was growing up, or even trying to function as an adult.
Samantha, you've explained to me the chain link, how it goes, how you say it was hereditary and how it's generational. How does it first begin? Say a person's, they don't have that past history of it burning them, of it, inflicting that trauma. How can it begin in a person who's normal for the most part?
So, um, wow. Okay, so this is what's going to be really amazing to you that people need to know. When I am looking at somebody who is a victim, okay, healthy adults do not get victimized. And healthy adult had parents or guardians who were very self-aware and very emotionally intelligent. And when they are younger and their little brains are at its full capacity and able to learn and feel safe, they are learning emotional intelligence. They are learning to be strategic and think for themselves. They are learning to trust their intuition because that's what they're being taught at home. So a healthy adult who was that had a good upbringing doesn't get abused. They just don't. And I know so many people like, oh, I had such a good childhood. I don't know how I ended up in an abusive situation. It's untrue. Um, when somebody is living in full self awareness and somebody is living in emotional intelligence, they don't get abused. They don't get into an abusive situation. So a healthy adult, unless, they are kidnapped, if you will, something traumatic like that, or, I've gone over into war, into a traumatic, unexpected event, they don't end up in unhealthy relationships. We live what we've been taught. And so when I see a victim in an abusive relationship, I already know that came from childhood. It just, that's a fact. Healthy people get with healthy people. Unhealthy people get with unhealthy people. It's just a fact. It's true. Um, Except for, of course, if an event happens that traumatizes them, and it's really hard for people to cope with. As far, as I was saying, like war, or they've been in some, a horrible accident that was traumatizing, or something like that. That could definitely trigger PTSD in somebody, but they have a baseline where they know that they can come back to something that's normal, if that makes sense. So they understand, okay, they're going through therapy, they're getting their help, but at the same time they have a baseline, like, I know I used to be like this, so I know where I want to go back to, or resemble. People who have been abused when they were children don't have that. And even today you can ask me, what does a healthy relationship, look like? I can't tell you by experience because I've never had one. So I've chosen to stay single for myself. I've never experienced it. So not saying that I can't have a healthy relationship. I'm just not ready right now, definitely, to try to embark on that venture, if you will. But I don't have a baseline. I can describe somebody else's relationship, but I would not be honestly be able to tell you if this is what a healthy relationship looks like. I could only describe it from what I've looked at as a third party. Does that make
Would
sense?
you?
Did that answer what you needed?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say, because the narrative around domestic violence is that, or at least the perceived narrative is that men usually are the aggressors and women are the people who get to inflict the damage on. Do you agree that there's this disproportionate effect of domestic violence between men and women, and why would you say that?
Yeah. Statistically, it's true. So if you want to look at the stats, that is absolutely true. But there's a reason why, and it's not 100% true. Okay, it's more likely for the man to be the aggressor than the woman. Okay, because female versus a male makeup, their body is completely different. Women have way more estrogen, which is very much um, um, a receiving, I want to say cell, but women are receivers, men are givers. So testosterone is more outward, it's extroverted. That's, I guess, that's why I'm looking for, extroverted. Estrogen gives you the willpower to make action, take action. And so men, of course, just genetically have more estrogen, not estrogen, but testosterone than women do. Women have more estrogen. Women are more, we're more the receptive side, introverted in that. But that's not 100% of the time. There are many men who end up getting abused and victimized by women. And that's a fact. And we need to address that. There needs to be help and facilities and shelters and programs for men who are victims. I don't think that's getting enough attention, and it needs to. With that being said, between the men and the women, where was I headed with this? It okay, that's just where I was headed. I apologize. But it is known also that men who have anger problems, that their testosterone is too low. And what happens when you get abused on a continuous basis, that it messes with all of your chemicals in your brain. So it stops some of the healthy chemicals in your body or in your brain producing what you need to function with. So this is what makes men really, really angry, is their testosterone's too low. Estrogen, what makes women feel neglected and not loved and also angry, is when her testosterone's too high. So it just works the opposite. So the women need more estrogen, men need more testosterone. That's just kind of a medical thing I wanted to throw in there, explaining the difference between men's bodies and women's body. But the fact of the matter is that, whether I understand that, don't want to get too much into the equal, being equal, this has nothing to do with equality between men and women. It literally has to do with their genetics and with their makeup. A male's body is different than a woman's body. That's just a medical fact. And males are made to be more of the performer. So that's why it looks like that. But what we don't understand and what doesn't get enough attention is that whether you're the abuser or whether you are the victim, that you have the exact same upbringing. That child had the same upbringing as a female or a male. So it does not matter. The abuser and the victim are both toxic. And they are both raised up in the exact same toxic environment.
That's an interesting point. I think usually you would think people would think the opposite when it comes to testosterone. You think men would have it too high, so they need an outlet to express it. But instead, you're just saying it's low. It's too low, and that's the reason why.
It was, yes, and I was so shocked when I learned this. I was completely shocked, and I guess and the way that Dr. John Gray explained it made perfect sense. Is this actually came from a doctor? This is not my own words, or my, I just found it during my research. But yeah, it's he said, Dr. Gray was saying that for men, when they find themselves feeling angry and wanting to get violent, that they need to do something that they're good at, and it's constructive, and it will raise their testosterone, and they will start feeling better and calm down. But it's that when it drops so low, is when it triggers all of these emotions that I'm not good enough, I'm not needed, I'm not being the hero. And it's just in the men's makeup to play that role. And again, has nothing to do with equality. This is men are different than women. And of course, you have all your ranges of men and women, but in general, that's the way it works. And
Yeah.
I think it's okay. That has nothing to do, again, with equality, because Lifehouse Project is all about women's empowerment. And I think that really gets confused. I think a lot of people mistake what women's empowerment is. And what women's empowerment really has to deal with, can I walk down the street and be safe? That's women's empowerment. Can I go to a nightclub with my girlfriends and be safe? Can I
Yeah.
go jogging at 9 p.m. at night and be safe? And I have
Yeah.
to say, no, they cannot. They can't. That's what equality means. That's what women's empowerment really means. Can we just be safe?
I want to go back to what you said before about that the focus on tending to men, especially when it comes to domestic violence cases, is a bit ignored nowadays. It's funny that you mentioned that because um, the TikTok account that, or the group that created that TikTok account that you follow, the Meriden Wallingford Chrysalis, actually has a program for men to watch out for these instances of domestic violence. When I was talking to one of the staff members, she said that she kind of saw a gap in the conversation of teen dating when it came to looking for the signs of domestic violence. Would you say that's true?
Right, right. And because there's just not enough education. And just like even with my own life, I didn't teach my kids how, the dangers of dating and what to look out for, because I didn't know. Um, I didn't know what the red flags were at that time. I certainly know now, but a little bit, too late. I know that one, I think, yeah, I know one of my children for sure. He is living with a narcissist. He is not an abuser. He's ended up actually being a victim. So I've got three boys and I've got one girl. And so I know for a fact that men need to watch out for signals of what a narcissist woman looks like. They're just as evil and devious as a narcissistic male. I don't think society looks at them as much as a threat, because the problem is that society doesn't understand that mental abuse is more dangerous than physical abuse. And the women narcissists are just as evil and can bring a person to suicide, or they can even kill the person by poisoning them. It's just as dangerous as anything that can be inflicted on you physically, if not more. So I think there's more danger in mental abuse, and we need to reach out to our men, because they need just as much help and healing as the women do, and it needs definitely more attention. There needs to be some type of movement where it's not gender focused, but more victim focused.
When when I was also talking to them, or I don't know if you looked at any of their videos, but they had just put it up. They had just created the account, and they were like the people in the videos were reading like a story, like first person perspective of the victims who underwent, these traumatic instances of domestic violence. And I see that you also have a TikTok account. Part of their goal was with the TikTok account was to reach this younger audience. Do you
Mhm.
feel do you feel like something like that is effective, is an effective tool
Yes.
for reaching the younger audience and informing them?
Absolutely. This is one of the problems coming out of an abusive life that I needed when I was younger. We didn't have the social platforms. We didn't have anybody that would reach out to us to educate us, and where we can, like, hey, that's happening to me. Hey, that sounds familiar. So I think this is really, really important. And I think it's important for men and women to know that we are not alone, and that this is a crisis, and for society as a whole to step up and do something about it, because it's going to take a cultural and society change to really make a difference here. Did you know that human trafficking wasn't even illegal in the United States until the year of 2003?
I did
That's
not
the
know that.
first federal law. First federal law, 2003. And then the states followed suit. So the America, as well as the rest of the world, but America even has a history of violence. And human trafficking is another word for slavery. But when we're going back into domestic violence, when you get an abuser that's abusing somebody who's massively manipulating them and really doing some permanent damage to them mentally, um, they are really, it's another form of slavery because they have a complete control over that person. It's another form of slavery. And people are just not quite looking at it in the right perspective. This damages society as a whole. The medical expenses, the loss of wages, the people that are on welfare, the mental health that we have to spend out from domestic violence are in the billions of dollars. I've got research that I'll be putting up on my website on how much money we spend in society for domestic violence survivors or people or women or victims who keep on going back into domestic violence, and the care, the health care has to continue to care for them again and again and again. I'm not talking just about broken bones. I'm talking about people coming in with nervous breakdowns, or long-term illnesses, like psoriasis and cancer and, any of those other long-term illnesses. So it really does tax society as a whole if we continue to allow this to happen and not bring in the complete programs for a complete holistic healing. We've got to do it.
I think what I like about these conversations is that it's mainly focused about changing the predominant discourse around these questions and issues. I remember reading a study. It was saying that men who felt that that traditional masculinity was threatened, and this is obviously becoming more and more obvious as feminism and stuff like equality becomes more not normalized but more talked about, how they often feel so down that the traditional masculinity standards that they uphold become, you know, obsolete, that what is it, 34-year-olds end up like committing suicide.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. So I think what was interesting about and what was cool about the TikTok account was that usually it's a platform for, these little funny videos and whatnot, but to kind of intertwine that same discourse and to get it people out there where it's just not a platform for funny videos for people doing like some, clever jump cuts and whatnot. I thought that was probably the best part about one of the most interesting parts about it.
Yeah, I really like how we are definitely becoming more vocal and using different platforms. One of the things that society needs to understand and come into more of a balance. This is not, because I kind of cringe when when we're talking about, femininity and women's empowerment, because I think it's been driven to a point where people are not understanding really the meaning and the understanding of it. So the fact of the matter is that that men are needed and they are precious. And there's so much stuff that they do give in society, but also in personal relationships. It's just natural. And really, what feminism needs to come and really relate, I think, better, it's really about us wanting just to feel safe. And
Yeah.
I think would take care of so much of the argument and the back and forth of the women's empowerment move and the the feminism move or empowerment move. It's men feeling like they're not needed, and that's not true. We do need our men, and they are heroes in so many different ways for us, and they always will be. And they need to be honored and loved for that. So we need to speak out more for that. And women are going to have to be the ones who speak out, because we don't need our men hurting either. This isn't about hurting somebody else. This isn't just about healing.
I think I agree with you. I think also the correct approach would be that instead of the I don't I'm not well versed in feminist discourse, but from what I've seen, from what I've heard, I think it would also be productive if, you know, we were to look at men and say, you're also hurting yourselves too when you do this stuff, when you go back to the same traditional ideals that you uphold and you don't realize it, you know. But to me, I also think it's a culture shock. I really think, the world's changing. Some people just can't deal with that change, so they kind of resort to, like you said, that baseline, that foundation which they were always used to.
Right. And that's when you get back into your human nature. It feels uncomfortable when we go against our nature. And going back to the Scorpio, it's in the nature of the Scorpio to sting. Now, you could probably teach after some time the Scorpio not to sting, but it's going to be very uncomfortable and very difficult for that Scorpio to do that, because it's not in its nature. So when we are from zero age to 8 to maybe 10 years old, we are literally developing our nature. And so we have to be willing as a person, as an individual, as well as a society and culture, to change that very nature, and to make those tough choices and be willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit. But that's how people grow. So people
Yeah.
have to be willing to step up and do it. And that really does start with the individuals. But definitely, if we can come together as a collective and agree, you know what? We can't tolerate human trafficking anymore, then we can really make a big change, or come together and say, you know what, we just cannot tolerate child abuse anymore. If we eradicate child abuse, then those children are going to be productive members of society.
Yeah.
And, just like, with yourself, you had a really, really good childhood. You cannot probably even perceive of being in a relationship that would destroy you.
No, yeah, no, I
It's not
wouldn't
in your
tolerate it.
nature. Right. You would never meet somebody. You would never even try to pick somebody that was abusive. It's just not in
Yeah.
your nature. You couldn't perceive it.
Well, I have met, me not particular, but I have met people who've may not had a physically abusive childhoods,
Mhm.
but it was more in the fact that, you know, the parents never really got to know them, stuff like that. The parent really never put them out in the outside world. It's kind of like the parents' insecurities were projected onto the children.
And that's where it starts. And that's why I'm more concerned of what's going on mentally than physically.
Yeah.
The mental is the worst. That's the most damaging. And our court systems and our medical facilities don't even recognize that quite yet. The medical facilities are starting to recognize it. Our psychiatrists are starting to realize, wait a minute, this is way more dangerous than the physical part. And it does way more damage, because it's going to affect the entire adult life. So when I'm talking about child abuse, neglect is one of the main abuses. One of the main. When the parents are not going to show up and be there available emotionally for the children, and the parents themselves are not emotionally intelligent, the parents themselves are not, they don't have that self-regulation or that self-awareness, that is what is being taught and shown to that child, and that becomes a child's very nature.
I think I remember talking with this with one of my friends, and we veered into the discussion. We kind of went down the rabbit hole, and we kind of thought about it. We said, if this were to more to like, the tradition was that, you grow up, you get a job, you get married, right? That was the, those were the milestones of your life. Now I thought about it, since, you know, raising a child can be such a delicate process, and you see people raise children for the wrong reasons, for selfish reasons to have children. It kind of gets you it kind of gets to the discussion, should some people just not have children? You know what I mean? Until they're readily developed.
Right. And that's a really, really tough one, right? Because then you're getting into the point that you're telling an adult what they could and cannot do. And that's a slippery slope. Um, and that would be almost an impossible question to answer. I mean, I know that when I had my children, honestly, I should never have my children. When I did, I was not mature enough, and harm, they were harmed. I was in an abusive relationship, and their fathers were abusive. That's just the fact of the matter. And if I was a healthy adult, then they would have had a different father altogether, and they would have had a mother who was emotionally available to them. But I was still in that victim role. So, over my own life, I could say, man, I love my children so much. I wouldn't trade them for the world, but they definitely could have had a better life. Definitely. Um, but I mean, how do you make that decision for somebody? And you're right. So many people will have children for the wrong reasons you
Yeah.
know and a lot of people have children so they have somebody to love, or they feel needed. And I tell you, when you go into, at least from my personal experience, going into it on that emotional level, then you're already messing up, because you're bringing this young person into the world, um, and they're not there to fulfill a need of yours. You're there to nurture that person to grow up to be a functioning, healthy adult in the world. So, yeah.
It is a tough question, and it may never come up. It may never, and regardless what you say, I'm sure, speaking to you right now, you're a good person. I definitely can see you as a good mother. I have no doubt in my mind. But yeah, I think, I don't think we'll ever get to that point, but I think, it does raise some questions about, for individuals themselves to kind of reflect upon, like, do am I gonna want this kid just because it's gonna make me happy, or you know what I mean, stuff like that, or even get into a relationship. I would say stuff, when it comes to that.
Right, right. It is really, really tough. But I think really what we need to focus on as a society, what we really need to focus on is, how do we stop the abuse before it happens? The earlier that we can reach the children, the earlier that we can reach those young adults, the better chance that we have of eradicating child abuse. So, if you really think about it, if we reach out to these young women who are in their early teens or maybe the early 20s, even, and start steering them in a different direction and teaching them there's another way to live, a healthier way to live, a healthier way to make decisions, and really teaching them about self awareness and emotional intelligence, then when they get pregnant, then they've already broken that cycle of abuse, because they're going to be end up in a healthier situation. So now we just saved children by saving that young woman or even that young man in the late teens or early 20s. We then saved another child's life. The child may not be
Absolutely.
born yet, but we saved another child's life. So we need to look at it in that direction. This is important. We need to get to people as early as possible. If somebody would have gotten to me in my early 20s or my late teens, my life would have been completely different.
Absolutely. Samantha, I'm sorry to cut it short. I have to go to work soon. Yeah. Thank you very much for talking. You have been erudite. You've been given, it's a wealth of information. It was just a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk and get all that out. I
Yep.
appreciate it. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Good luck with everything. I hope you have a wonderful and a better 2021.
Oh, I will. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It'll be wonderful. You too.
Have a